Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar hosted by Parents for Public Schools. My name is Joanne Mickens and I am the Executive Director of PPS. And today we are looking forward to hearing from 3 public education advocates from various locations around our country as they talk with us about what they have seen in terms of attacks on public education, who they have seen fostering those attacks, and what we value that we feel is central to public schools. And they will share with us words of hope, encouragement, and action for us as we work to advocate for public education in our own districts and states. Thank you to Jeff Coltrane, Beth Lewis, and Rod Grammer for joining us today as our panelists. Additionally, we welcome from our own staff, Becky Glover, who is our policy analyst, and she will be our facilitator for today. And Colleen Dibble, our Director of Chapter Services, will introduce our opening guest speaker. And so now I'll turn it over to Colleen for her to introduce our very special guest. Thank you and welcome.
Hi, everyone. As Joanne said, we have a fantastic panel of panelists with us today. But before we hear from our panelists, we do have a special guest here to share opening remarks with you. Please join me in welcoming a well-known advocate of public education, North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper. Governor Cooper recently declared a state of emergency for public education in North Carolina and has worked tirelessly to negate the harsh attacks on public education in his state. Governor Cooper, as a North Carolinian myself with children in Pitt County Public Schools, I personally thank you on behalf of Parents for Public Schools and all public education advocates for being with us today. And we look forward to your words of hope, encouragement, and aspiration. We'll turn it over to you, Governor Cooper.
Well, thank you, Kylene. I'm excited to be here today with so many wonderful parents who care so much about our public schools. Grateful, Kylene, for your leadership in Eastern North Carolina, and particularly there in Pitt County. Welcome, everybody. As a product of North Carolina's public schools, I can't think of anything that can help us level the playing field, provide opportunities for everybody, reduce the wage gap that we have, the wealth gap now, like public education can. Proud to come from a family of educators. My mother was the very best public school teacher in the history of North Carolina. I will still see people from time to time and say, Governor, I want to pay you a compliment, and I'll think it's about me, and they'll say, your mom was the best teacher I ever had. Grateful for her leadership, grateful for the public education I got, grateful for the public education that my children got. And I'll tell you, the majority of the people of North Carolina and across this country still support our public schools. For a century and a half, North Carolina has believed that education is the gateway to progress. We have put forth extraordinary efforts like our Smart Start program, recognizing the importance of early childhood education. And we have believed strongly that we need to support our public schools. But over the last decade, we've seen an erosion, and we've seen in the legislature, a legislature that not only has underfunded our public schools, but has attempted to essentially choke the life out of them. And it is why I declared a state of emergency in North Carolina for public education. I spend a lot of my time going to schools and sitting in classrooms, watching teachers work. I visit with them, listen to them, and I challenge people who criticize our public schools to actually see what's going on there. What you see are committed public servants who love their children, who are working hard to teach them reading and English and science and math and the arts. and they deserve our support. And that's one thing I like about this organization, is that you know how important it is to support those educators across your various states in this great country. But the reason that I declared a state of emergency are manyfold. Let's first start with probably the worst school voucher program now in the country that has just been passed by our legislature. It sets aside billions of dollars for essentially unaccountable schools. There is no income limit. Therefore, multimillionaires who already have and will continue to have their children in private academies will now be able to get a government check to subsidize that. Let me be real clear. I think private schools are fine. My problem is I don't believe that they should be funded with taxpayer money at the expense of public education. And that is exactly what this voucher program on steroids that North Carolina just passed will do. It will hurt our schools. We've done an analysis. Many of the rural schools will see a loss of funding. We work to energize superintendents, principals, teachers, parents across our state. And these legislators heard from them. In fact, they made some changes in this legislation to reflect the deep concern that they heard from their districts back home. But still, the minority of people who don't support our public schools were able to win the day with this voucher program. And it's going to be a mission for all of us to cut back on this and to make sure we are instead investing in our educators and in our children. We have about a 3,500 vacancy teacher gap right now. And the raise that the North Carolina General Assembly just provided was a little bit, but not nearly enough. It was almost 7% over a 2-year period. Contrast that with my budget, which I sent a balanced budget to the legislature, which gave them an 18% raise, something that we need to attract and retain the best teachers. We also have a constitutional provision in our state that requires that every child receive a sound basic education. And we now have orders from the court as to what investments this legislature needs to make in order to ensure that constitutional requirement. Unfortunately, this General Assembly only funded about a fourth of those requirements from the Supreme Court, essentially pushing the court away and saying, we don't need your interference, when in fact, these investments are desperately needed for surround support, for counseling, for at-risk children, for children with disabilities, all of the things that our public schools tackle with gusto. We also know that there are a few people in this state and across the country who want to bring political and culture wars into our classroom. You see them going to school boards. You see this General Assembly trying to get more control over the school system so that they can put their appointees on boards that make decisions about charter schools and that could potentially make decisions about school curriculum. And many of you have seen the right-wing positions that some of these people take when, in essence, all our teachers want to do is to make sure these children are taken care of, that they get a quality education. And this nonsense about indoctrination in public schools is exactly that, nonsense. And it's only for political reasons, because they know that people care deeply about their children and their children's education, and they're trying to stoke fear in something that really doesn't exist. I could go on and on about things that the concerns that I have with our public schools, but I think it's important for me to say this to you. And I think because you're a member of this group, you know already it's important. Making sure that you are there for these teachers, there for these principals, that you support these administrators and school board members. Yes, give them your opinions, particularly suggestions when you may have different thoughts about direction that they are taking. But it is critically important that we continue to encourage them and lift them up. Talk to businesses in your communities to make sure that they continue to support our public schools. Show up at these school board meetings. It can be uncomfortable, but it's important for these school board members, that teachers, that students, principals know that you represent the real majority of people who support our public schools and who want them to succeed, who realize what a difficult job these educators have, but that you want to come and help them. I challenge some of you to actually run for the school board. I'll bet many of you may have stepped up to do that. When I meet with them, when I go to public schools, I always invite school board members to come, regardless of what persuasion they are. And I tell them that they have the hardest job in government right now. But it is so important for us to have supporters of public schools, supporters of teachers, supporters of investments in our public schools to run for these offices. If you don't run yourself, support people who do support our public schools, not only for school board membership, but for county commissioners, and particularly for state legislators. Here in North Carolina, we need more pro-public education legislators to run and to step up and to step into action. And you guys can make a real difference in helping these people step up and run and do the things that we need to do in our public schools. Look, we cannot give up on public education, even though some government leaders have. We must continue to make sure that they are supported so that every child has a chance, has an opportunity. We've got to make sure that these schools are strong. We can do this. I am very positive about it. I'm continuing my efforts throughout North Carolina to drum up support. Obviously, we're looking toward the next elections to make sure that we work to elect pro-public school candidates. With all of us coming together, we can make sure that every child gets a great education in our public schools. I'm grateful to get a chance to come on and to say hello. Jeff Coltrane is my education advisor. He has a wealth of knowledge and talks to me frequently about what's happening in our schools. I have a teacher advisory committee that I listen to very carefully. I often talk to parents and meet with superintendents throughout the state. The work that is going on is fantastic. We just need to give them more support. Thanks to Parents for Public Schools for letting me join you for a few minutes. And I hope that the rest of your event today is a good one. Take care.
Thank you, Governor Cooper, for your words of encouragement and for your service to the students, teachers, school administrators, families, and all citizens in North Carolina. We'll now welcome our panelists and ask each of you to share your name, the title and organization you represent today, and what state your organization represents. Mr. Coltrane, we will start with you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jeff Coltrane, Senior Education Advisor to Governor Cooper. Very excited to join you all today. I have been working with Governor Cooper for the past 6 years. He took office in 2017 and was reelected in 2020 for his second term. I'm a lifelong North Carolinian. Grew up in the central part of the state near Greensboro, High Point area, Randolph County. Public school graduate, graduated from Randolph County Schools. and then also a public school parent. I have a daughter who graduated 2 years ago from Jordan High School in Durham, and then a son who's a junior at Jordan. And I'm a former kindergarten, first grade teacher at public schools in Durham. So excited to be with you. Have been working for the last 18 years in education policy, and of course have had the thrill of working with Governor Cooper, who you just heard from, and excited to be here today.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Coltrane. We look forward to hearing more from you today from all those different perspectives. Now let's meet Beth Lewis.
Hi, everyone. It's an honor to be here. I'm Beth Lewis. I'm the director of Save Our Schools Arizona, which is a grassroots group of 18,000 volunteers across Arizona, mostly parents, teachers, community members who are fighting for our public schools. I taught in Arizona for 12 years. I just left the classroom last year, and I have 2 children in public schools, one in elementary school and one in middle school. And just as a mom and a teacher, I've seen firsthand what the absolute destruction of public education in Arizona has done to my own children, my students. And that's why, I took action and formed Save Our Schools Arizona and continue the good fight every day for the last 6.5 years and still going.
Good. All right. Thank you, Beth. We'll certainly gain a lot of inspiration from you as we hear about your experiences. And it's encouraging to know that before you entered this work, you were a mom, a teacher, and an everyday citizen. And finally, we want to introduce you to our third panelist, Mr. Rod Grammer. Will you tell us about yourself?
Thank you, Becky, and hello, everyone. My name is Rod Grammer. I'm president and CEO of Idaho Business for Education. We're a group of more than 250 business leaders across the state of Idaho, working to improve education in our state from early education through higher education. And it's a privilege and honor to be here today. My kids are both products of the public schools here in Idaho and Oregon. And they got a great education. We are strong supporters of education, both personally and at Idaho Business for Education. It's great to be here today. Thank you, Becky.
Thank you. Thank you to each of you today. We know we've got a lot to learn from your leadership and from your perspectives. So let's move into a few questions and hear what each of you has to share with us about public education advocacy today. We're going to rotate today. So Mr. Coltrane, we're going to start with you with this first question, and then we'll hear from Ms. Lewis and then Mr. Grammer. So the first question is, describe what attacks on public schools look like on the ground in your community or state, and give us an example.
Thank you, Becky, for that. And I think you heard pretty well from the governor sort of what it's looked like here in North Carolina. The first thing we've been struggling with under the attacks over the last decade, as you said, is the underfunding of public schools. This has been just inadequate funding to meet the needs, both of our growing state. We're now the 9th largest state in the country. And coming out of the Great Recession with budget cuts, we still have not recovered yet to the amount of money adjusted for inflation that our public schools were receiving back in 2007, 2008. Also, inadequate raises for our teachers. We're still lagging behind many of our neighboring states, both in average teacher salary and especially in beginning teacher salary. In the Southeast, we're 11th out of 12th in beginning teacher salary. And we've seen a number of neighboring states with very conservative legislatures, South Carolina, Alabama, Tennessee, who have made significant investments in teacher salaries, and we're still not quite there. We've also seen, particularly over the last couple of years, tax cuts that diminish our state's ability to actually fund public education. We're very fortunate to have a pretty robust finance system for our state and for our public schools. About 2/3 of our state of funding for public schools comes from the state. But the tax cuts that have been proposed most recently in the session, one of the proposals would have cut our state funding by 20%, which would have just decimated our ability to fund our public schools moving forward. And we also see sort of inadequate funding for our early childhood system. And we know that if kids don't get that strong start at age 3 and 4 before they come into kindergarten, then they're going to struggle to catch up for the next 13 years. So The other thing, as the governor mentioned, is continued expansion, and of course, the most radical expansion just recently of our voucher program. North Carolina started a voucher program about 10 years ago that was focused, or supposed to be focused, on low-income families. It was like the proverbial camel's nose under the tent. Every year, the legislature would slightly increase the amount of income that was required to meet the requirement for the voucher, until just this past year, a family of four making $110,000 would actually have qualified for a voucher. And of course, now they've expanded it to where anybody, even millionaires, will be able to get money to send their kids to private schools, even if they're already in a private school. And so why do we need to be subsidizing the education of students going to private schools? And there's been no accountability for that program whatsoever. And then very little regulations. We know that teachers are not required to be certified in private schools. They're not required to serve students with disabilities or meet the needs of students in other ways. And of course, there is zero evidence that a voucher program works. There's been several studies over the last couple of years that have showed that actually some students tended to fall behind when they went to a private school coming out of public school. And lastly, as the governor mentioned, we've seen attacks in the culture wars, and particularly a lot of focus on that our public schools are indoctrinating students, which we know is not the case. And we've had to fight, and unfortunately it did pass, but a Parents' Bill of Rights, which was based on the one in Arizona, which most of the rights that were outlined in that bill our parents already had. But of course, it was another attempt to sort of get in there and blame the public schools for teaching about sexuality and gender identity to kindergarten through fourth grade students versus actually something that was meaningful. And we've also seen attacks on our standards and curriculum. The legislature's tried to take over the state board's authority to actually set standards for our state, and which is driven by educators and professionals. And so that continued culture war attacks on our public schools.
Thank you, Mr. Coltrane. Beth?
Well, I certainly echo all of that, Jeff. We're feeling all of that in Arizona. And, I think it's important to point out that a lot of folks in a lot of states are probably feeling those words profoundly today. And that's because this is an orchestrated, plan or playbook to privatize our schools, to destroy our public schools. And we're feeling it really keenly here in Arizona. It has been death by 1,000 cuts. Kylene asked me to talk a little bit about my perspective as a teacher and a parent. I mean, 12 years ago, as a brand new teacher, I felt the dramatic underfunding then, and it's only gotten so much worse. 10 years ago, I was put in a classroom with 42 students and 35 desks. I didn't have a computer. I didn't have a projector. I had to buy them. We didn't have books. We didn't have a curriculum. I had to figure it out. And I can't say that things have gotten much better. There are some areas where there's a lot more, but that's because they're richer areas with well-funded PTOs and, local bond and override measures and high property taxes. And so, we have no funding in the state. Our teacher pay gap is enormous, the second worst in the country. Like North Carolina, our teachers have not had adequate raises in many, 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 many years. And so a lot of teachers are leaving the profession. And I'm doing PTO now that I'm not in the classroom. I'm running the PTO at my local elementary school. And the stuff that we're fundraising for is basics. We're talking crayons, we're talking dry erase markers. That's what the teachers are asking for. They don't, otherwise they're self-funding those absolute basics. Meanwhile, we've got this voucher program where parents are using vouchers to go on luxury ski trips, to go on whale watching excursions, to buy, multiple laptops. And so we really are seeing sort of the final chapter, the final realization of what special interests have been working on all along, which is to starve our schools in order to prop up, another alternative via private schools and homeschool vouchers. And, it's sad, it's frustrating. We've seen them discredit our public schools using, CRT, SEL attacks on LGBTQ youth, book bans. It's the same across the country because it's the same actors. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, but, we feel it so keenly here. And vouchers are projected to siphon away nearly 1/8 of our K-12 budget this year. It's almost $1 billion, but in Arizona, we have so little funding that $1 billion is a 12% cut across the board. And our schools cannot afford a 1% cut. So it's dire here and everywhere.
Rod, tell us about Idaho.
Well, first of all, I might be able to give a little good news. So I'll start with the good news, okay? So Idaho is one of the reddest states in the country. Our legislature is about 88% Republican. But yet, over the last 6 years, we have killed voucher-like legislation 5 times. So our state has no tax credit, no vouchers, no education savings accounts, at least now. But these out-of-state groups and some in-state groups, which we'll talk about later, I'm excited about talking about that. As Beth said, it's a national, I call it a cabal. It's a national cabal. And they are pounding our state with campaign contributions to voucher-friendly legislators, defeating anti-voucher legislators, and spending the top 5 lobbyists in the legislature in the last session were all 3 of them were all pro-voucher organizations. So the money's pouring into the state, and the battle is on big time. Last session, I didn't think we could kill the voucher in the ESA program that they proposed, but I thought we had a 50-50 chance going in the legislature, and as it turned out, we actually won. So, but that's because of some very courageous legislators. So we have the typical things that you've all seen, mobs showing up at school board meetings. We've had book banning. We passed a bill last session to criminalize librarians that gave, quote, harmful books to students. The governor vetoed that bill, and his veto was sustained. And many of those legislators that sustained his veto have been censured by their local Republican Central Committees. I really want to honor those legislators. What's really scary is, like in other states, they're taking over school boards. It's not K through 12, but we had the far right take over one of our community colleges, our oldest community college board of trustees, and that college is about ready to lose its accreditation because they've created so much chaos. The most recent takeover of a school board was in West Bonner up in northern Idaho, not far from the Canadian border. And when they took over the school board, they just created huge chaos. They hired the spokesperson for one of the most pro-voucher organizations, who's never been a teacher, never been a superintendent, has no credentials, hired him to be their superintendent. But the people in West Bonner rose up, and they took back their school board. They recalled 3 of the school board members this fall, and they have vacancies. But the people rose up in that community, took back their school board. It was a beautiful thing to see. So anyway, I look forward to talking more about this, but just like every place else, and the pattern's the same. Pattern's the same in every state, and that's the important thing for people to understand. Thank you.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you to all of our panelists for your wisdom and insight. And now we'd like to switch topics a bit and ask, what have you learned about why this is happening in your community or state, and who's behind it or connected to it? So Ms. Lewis, we'll start with you this time, and then we'll move to Mr. Grammer, and finally Mr. Coltrane.
So I will never forget the day that universal vouchers were first passed in 2017 in Arizona. That we were all down at the Capitol. They shoved it through the House and Senate the same day. And we were kind of starting to pull at the threads and starting to see who was coming into this state and who was pushing lawmakers around. But again, we're moms, we're teachers, we're new to this. We had never really been to the legislature. And that night, Betsy DeVos, who had just been named as Trump's Secretary of Education, tweeted congratulations to Governor Ducey. And I think that was that moment where the light bulb went off and we all realized this is a master plan, this is big, this is national, this is orchestrated. And then we kept pulling that yarn. And I mean, we've been pulling ever since. It honestly becomes more and more interconnected and even more scary the more you pull that thread. In Arizona, you know, folks like Betsy DeVos and American Federation for Children have been active for decades, planting the seeds, tilling the soil for this moment of universal vouchers. And, you know, I really see three different types of groups that are pushing towards the same end. There are groups like Betsy DeVos and Alliance Defending Freedom that are really using this as a way to advance religious ideology, Christian nationalism, etc. And then there are some groups that are really just pushing for vouchers as a way to sort of fuel white flight and segregate. And, you know, these are extremists, but they can't talk about this the way that folks talked about it in the 50s. And often they disingenuously sell vouchers as a way to help Black and brown children to leave their failing schools. And as soon as vouchers are passed, those groups drop those populations like a hot potato. That's what we see here time and time again. And then the third type of organizations that are pushing for vouchers and destroying public schools are really just looking for profit, right? They're viewing public schools as a massive, untapped $500 billion annual industry. So it's Machiavellian. It's, you know, their ends are not necessarily the same, but they all have oodles of money. They're all very connected. And it seems like they've sort of made, you know, backroom deals to work together, at least in Arizona, to ensure that universal vouchers with zero accountability rule the day. And right now they're winning. But the good news in Arizona and across the country is that they may have the money, but we have the people, and the people love public schools and they support our teachers. And I think at the end of the day, the people always win, just might take a little while.
Okay, Mr. Grammer.
Yeah, you know, I call this the school privatization industrial complex because basically it is funded by, you know, the usual suspects, Charles Koch, Betsy DeVos, the Bradley Foundation up in Wisconsin. All across the country are these billionaires that are set to destroy public education. I do believe they are set out to destroy public education. Here in Idaho, we have a group called the Idaho Freedom Foundation. I know that Beth and Jeff are probably familiar with the State Policy Network. I think you probably have the state, an affiliate of the State Policy Network in your state. These are state policy networks funded by two dark money funds. They have affiliates in states. In Idaho, it's the Idaho Freedom Foundation. And they're the in-state organization sort of taking the lead on this. The Catholic Church in Idaho, just like other states, are very active trying to get ESAs or vouchers. In Wisconsin, for example, the Catholic schools are almost 100% funded by the voucher program in that state. So the Catholic Church especially has an interest in that in our state. We have the American Federation for Children, Betsy DeVos's group. They're kind of taking the lead on this in our state, but they also have help from Yes Every Kid, which is the Charles Koch organization. The Institute for Justice has weighed in on this. The Idaho Defenders for Freedom group, I think Beth mentioned their group in Arizona as well. So basically, it is a cabal. It's a network. I counted once that we have about 14 different organizations that are trying to get vouchers or ESAs in Idaho. And at least half of those, if not more, are funded by out-of-state billionaires. And I call them their front groups. Is really these, you know, they're meant to look like they're grassroots organizations, but they really have no grassroots organization. They're really just funded from out of state. And they've got a lot of money, a lot of power, and they've been very effective at knocking off our pro public education legislators. And so it is really a cabal that we are up against. and they're playing the long game here in all of our states.
Yeah. Mr. Coltrane?
I would agree. A lot of what we're seeing in our state is coming also from the right. As the governor mentioned, and I mentioned earlier, that we started seeing a lot of this about a decade ago, whenever our General Assembly switched from a Democratic majority to a Republican majority. And that's when the voucher program started. That's when we saw North Carolina did have a cap on charter schools, and they lifted the cap. And now we've seen sort of an unbridled expansion and a lot of for-profit charter operators coming into the state. I know, Beth, you have a lot in Arizona as well. And so I think that privatization industrial complex that Rod mentioned is an apt description of that. We also see that a lot of people are just politicizing public education now, when it used to be a pretty bipartisan agreement on the importance of public schools and on helping to support our public schools. And we're just seeing more and more politicization of it. And it feels like the school choice movement has become an us versus them versus options for parents. School choice now feels like, to me, more of an anti-public school movement than really options for parents. And we know, at least in North Carolina, I don't know if it's the same in Idaho and Arizona, but our public school districts provide loads of choices to parents. But that's often not what's talked about in the school choice movement. It's about private schools and charter schools. And so that's felt more and more like an us versus them type of argument. But I think, to Beth's point, public schools do have the people. In North Carolina, 8 out of 10 school-age children attend public schools, which means parents are voting with their feet. They like their public schools. And we see nationally polling data that says 80% of parents who have kids in public schools are very happy with their public schools. And so I think a lot of what we need to be focused on, as the governor said, is lifting up our public schools, talking about the great things they're doing, helping to mobilize our fellow parents, our fellow advocates, and really getting the word out and talking about this. Because it's important that not only are public schools well-funded, that they're well-resourced, but that also they have the support that they need, and that people know that public schools is really the best place to get your education. They serve all students, no matter where you come from, and they do it in some of the best ways possible.
Right. Thank you. Thanks again for sharing this valuable knowledge. Finally, we've got one last question, and hope that each of you can answer this question in a way that will leave us with two things: hope and action. Where we can find hope, and what specific actions can we take to create or improve hope for strengthening and improving public schools in our communities and states. We'll first start with Mr. Grammer, then Mr. Coltrane, then Ms. Lewis.
Thank you, Becky. In the hope category, I see a resurrection of the public school movement. This is a great example of it here today, where we have so many people here. We have so many articulate people defending public education. I really see a strong public schools movement across the country. The second thing is, in the hope category, is I think the public's starting to understand that the culture wars that are aimed at public schools, critical race theory, the books and things like that, the culture wars, are really political movements and not legitimate. I've actually heard of some recent polling that actually supports that point of view. And thirdly, and I'll touch on this a little bit when I get to action, but I think there's a growing sense that this is really expensive. And I think there's a growing awareness, as like I talked to Beth a couple of weeks ago, and it could be $900 million expense for Arizona. I talked to a friend who's in Indiana this week. He said their expansion is going to cost about $1 billion. I think people are starting to understand that. In the action area, first of all, Beth has touched on this, and Jeff, I think the greatest asset that the public school movement has are the parents. The lion's share of kids are in the public schools, and if we can mobilize that 80-some% that Jeff mentioned to support public schools, not just at the legislature, but at the ballot box, we've got a really powerful movement. And I don't see any reason why, if these parents saw that this cabal is a threat to their children, just like other things can be a threat to their children, they will get angry, they will get mobilized, and they will get out. But they need information. Mm-hmm. And so I think the other action is, Kylene mentioned at one point that I was on the same panel as her at a Wisconsin public schools meeting. And I really urge them to take some of those rural districts that have been hurt by vouchers in Wisconsin and do an analysis of how they've been hurt, how the local people have had to raise their own property taxes to keep the schools alive, how that's hurt farmers and ranchers and small business people, and take that to the public and help them understand what's going on in their communities. So that's really important. You can't mobilize the parents if you don't give them the information. The third thing, and I think especially from a business point of view, we've got to talk about the tax impact of this. When we start talking about $1 billion, or in Florida, it could be between $2 and $4 billion, the public has to understand that these are their tax dollars that are subsidizing the education of millionaires' kids. And that's going to make them as mad as a bunch of hornets. And I think this one of the strongest arguments we have against vouchers, ESAs, is the tax issue, the cost of these programs. And I think the public is going to get outraged when they find out that they have to pay more for their property taxes in rural Arizona, Indiana, North Carolina, and Idaho, so that some CEO in one of our capital cities can send their kids to a private school. So please use the tax, the fiscal. And the last one, I'm not sure I put this in my bio, but I was a journalist for 40 years. And so I can tell you that the media doesn't understand this issue. And I think we have to really educate the reporters in our states, help them understand that this is a private school cabal, it's a industrial complex, and that it's being funded by out-of-state billionaires. We really have to educate the media about what's going on, because they are the conduit to the parents that we've got to mobilize, and the business community we have to mobilize. So I'd say those 4 things are job one for all of us who really support public education.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to say ditto to everything Rod just said, but I'll say, public schools are the bedrock of our communities, both in North Carolina, I'm sure they are all across the country. I mean, just think of a Friday night football game, a fall festival in elementary school gym, right? The winter carnival, that they are the hubs of our communities. And I think nowhere did we see that more than during the pandemic, when our teachers and our school nutrition workers and our bus drivers were out delivering meals, delivering homework to kids, getting kids connected to hotspots and getting them computers. They were really central to keeping things going. And in North Carolina, not only are they the bedrock from a cultural fabric, but they're also our biggest employers. In 38 of our 100 counties, the public school system is the biggest employer in that county. In 81 of our 100 counties, they're a top 3 employer. And in all of our counties, they're a top 5 employer. So they are not only central to educating our kids, they're also employing our communities, right? These are great jobs that folks have. Public schools serve all students, no matter your race, your ethnicity, your socioeconomic status, your religion, or where you're from. That doesn't happen in private schools. We know that private schools can turn kids away. They can discriminate against who they want to serve or not. And a strong public education system is key to ensuring that our students are fully prepared to participate in the jobs of today and tomorrow, but also, just as important, key to a strong, well-informed citizenry and a vibrant, robust democracy. The common school movement that led to the creation of the public schools in the 1800s was based a lot on democratic ideals, right? We need a basic education for everybody so that we can all be well-informed citizens. And I think that's just key. Our public education system over the past 100 years built a workforce and a citizenry that made US the strongest economy in the world and built a thriving middle class. And we don't need to turn our back on that. That's what got us here. That's why we need to keep fighting for this. And public schools bring us together as a state and as a nation. They ensure support and opportunity to learn and thrive for all children, economically and as a society. And so we need to continue to support them. And of course, as Rod said, and I said earlier, an overwhelming majority of parents support our public schools. And so I think from an action standpoint, it's about mobilizing those voices out there, making sure that they're aware, as Rod said, of what's happening and what that means for our public schools, getting them to turn out at the ballot box, getting them to run for office, making sure that we're electing leaders who are supporting our public schools and are going to make sure that they're well-resourced and well-funded. I think just like what the Parents for Public Schools is doing and what many of you on this call today, we need to continue to build the kind of coalitions that this is. How can we work together as elected leaders, as local leaders, as parents, as advocates to build a coalition that's going to help to advocate for our public schools? To piggyback on what Rod shared as well, in addition to saying the great things that are happening in our public schools, because there are lots of great things, I know both as a teacher and as a parent, wonderful things that happen and outcomes that students in private schools might not get or opportunities they might not get. We also need to talk about the flip side. I think a lot of people, when they think of private schools, think of, in North Carolina, it's the Cary Academy, it's the Providence Day, it's the wealthy private school that you think of, but that's a sliver of private schools that are out there. And I've joked that the expansion of vouchers is going to lead to probably a plethora of strip mall private schools that are going to open up just to get the voucher money, but they're not going to be any type of quality. And because there's no regulations, in North Carolina, to open a private school, you just have to be registered with our Office of Non-Public Education. That's it. You don't have to have a college degree. You don't have to have a license. You don't have to have anything. You just have to be registered. And so there is no quality control. There is no accountability. And I think that's something that we as advocates need to continue to push on. And I will say, from the governor's push earlier this year in his state of emergency in public education, the accountability message rang through. They did include in the budget bill that passed with the provision some very modest accountability provisions, very, very modest, but it's a start, requiring that all non-public schools that receive voucher funds have to administer a common nationally standardized assessment to all 3rd and 8th graders, and then all 11th graders have to take the ACT. It's a start. It's not enough. But I think we need to continue to beat that drum, because not only is accountability important because we're putting public dollars with a private school, it's also important that parents know that they're getting something for that money. And I think that's vital if we really want a school choice movement where parents are making informed choices, then we need accountability. And so I think it's important that we continue to drive that point home. And then lastly, I'll just reiterate, I think it's about showing up and making sure that we're telling our story. I was talking to someone in our legislature recently who said they are regularly getting visits from charter schools, charter school advocates, private school advocates. But where's the people advocating for our public schools? And I think the folks who are trying to create the privatization complex that Rod mentioned are showing up and advocating. I think we also need to be advocating for our public schools as well.
Thank you. Ms. Lewis?
Co-sign everything that Rod and Jeff just said. For me, you asked about hope and action, and I think they're really the same thing. I think hope for us in Arizona is in the action. It is in the organizing. It's getting out, talking to people, educating, doing the outreach, working with the media. It's just that's the only way I can survive in this environment, at least, is to keep fighting. I think that a lot of people we as parents, we as teachers tend to think that the numbers need to be bigger, but we have to remember that starting small is huge, and that even just a few parents can really truly move the needle, that you don't have to worry about getting to thousands of parents, right? Having a crew of 3 parents who really get it in your district, that it will grow. And so, not being afraid to have those conversations every single day. You've got to talk to your neighbors. You've got to talk to your family. You got to talk to them about everything that's amazing that's going on in public schools. And then, like Jeff said, you really have to highlight, that's what we're seeing in Arizona. We're seeing subpar strip mall schools with no accountability, no certified teachers, no set curriculum, like no qualifications, no academic testing pop up everywhere. And, I don't think that taxpayers do understand. They think of our elite private schools and think, oh, that sounds great. So we're working with media. I put a really great link from this week. We had this huge expose that is really waking a lot of people up. And a lot of people have come to me and have said, I didn't really understand how bad it was until I saw that, until I saw the ski trips, until I saw the $10,000 sewing machine. And I think it's getting people to wake up. It doesn't really always bother people until it hits them. And we're all boiled frogs here in Arizona. We've gotten used to teachers making nothing. We've gotten used to self-funding classrooms. But the stuff that shocks people, like, let it shock them, right? Let it rock them. And then the last thing I'll say with parents is, if you want to organize parents, you got to meet them where they are. And that is in person. If you're going to host an event, you got to feed the kids, you got to provide babysitting services. We were having a lot of trouble with Spanish language outreach. And then one of our Spanish outreach organizers said, well, I'm just going to go to this Zumba class, because that's where all the moms in Phoenix Union are on Thursday nights. And so she did, and she ended up doing a presentation after Zumba class and got a bunch of moms really, really engaged. So meet them where they are. And then even TikTok and Instagram. It might sound really out there, but that's where we're getting a lot of our people who really didn't care, weren't really paying attention to the legislature, are really busy and are struggling to even get food on the table. But if you put it out there in a way that folks can digest, people do care. They really, really do. So I would just urge everybody to find a way to get involved. If the first step for you is to just share something on social media and you've never done that before because it's kind of political, that's okay. That's your first step, and it's huge. If you've already done that, try and get to work with like a local group that's knocking doors for a local funding measure or a school board candidate, or consider running for office. But just don't be afraid to start small. Don't be afraid to talk to everybody you know about this fight, because people really do care. And the only way that we take back our public schools is to make sure that everybody understands the existential threat that our public schools are under, and knows that we might not have public schools to fight for in 5 to 10 years if we don't take action now.
Right. Thank y'all so much to all of our panelists today for making the time for this webinar and sharing with us your own personal experiences in various areas across the country, and from your various perspectives as well, as individuals and what you do for a living. For those watching today, we hope that you leave this webinar feeling validated in your experiences as a public school advocate, feeling a sense of hope as you move forward, and with some new ideas about what you can do to advocate for high quality public schools in your area. And I just want to remind everyone that Parents for Public Schools is a nonpartisan 501c3 organization, which means we neither endorse nor oppose candidates or parties. And in our work to protect all children, we must call out these attacks on our public schools, who is behind them, and why. Because an attack on public schools is an attack on 90% of all children in America, and public education is an American value. So that matters. And now I'll switch it back over to Joanne for some closing remarks. Thank y'all today.
Well, all I can say is, wow. This has been absolutely great. I want to thank all of our panelists, and of course, Governor Cooper for joining us today. And thank you to all of our audience participants who were here for this wonderful discussion. we hope that if you have not yet done so, that you will visit PPS's website. Our info is displayed in on our background, so it's easy to capture. And I hope you'll sign up for our newsletter, our clearinghouse reports, where we discuss these kinds of issues and work hard to keep parents and other education advocates informed. Additionally, we're going to put a link in the chat to a survey so you can give us feedback on today's discussion so that the next time around we can do it even better. But thanks to all of you for being here, and I hope you've enjoyed this and learned as much as I have today. Thanks so much. And don't forget to look in the chat for the link to the survey. Thank you. And enjoy the rest of the afternoon.